The bond holds strong, old friend. We are ready.
Thern had not left the palace grounds without Emperor Ren in 30 years. The palace staff knew his routines. They knew the platform he preferred, and the hours he used it, and the particular trajectory of his morning stretches, which he did at dawn facing east with his wings at half extension, in a way that took up a significant portion of the upper courtyard. They had learned to leave the upper courtyard clear at dawn. They had learned everything there was to learn about an animal that had been present for 400 years and had consequently developed very specific habits. Which was why, on a Thursday morning in the middle of autumn, when Thern walked through the east gate of the palace grounds at the 9th hour, without Emperor Ren, and without any escort, the gate guard stood very still and watched him go, and then ran to find someone senior to report to. Thern did not look back. He had somewhere to be. He was 400 years old and he was the oldest dragon in the Empire, and he had spent his life observing things that humans did not have a long enough lifespan to observe. He had watched the patterns that played out across generations, the ones that repeated, and the ones that shifted, the ones that looked like chance from inside them, but were legible from where he stood, outside the human sense of time. He had been watching one particular pattern for 80 years. He had been waiting for it to complete. Thern moved through the city at ground level, which was unusual. He usually flew, but ground level was appropriate for this particular journey because he wanted to arrive at the Dragon Corps recruitment building from the front, from the direction a person would approach on foot, and he wanted to be visible from a distance so that the people inside had time to notice him before he arrived. The Dragon Corps recruitment building was a formal stone structure at the center of the administrative district. It had columns and a broad entrance, and a board outside where the recruitment announcements were posted. Thern knew where it was. He had flown over it many times in 400 years. He arrived at the broad entrance at the 10th hour. He walked to a position 30 feet from the entrance doors, which was approximately where he had calculated someone exiting the building would first see him clearly. He settled himself on the stone plaza. He folded his wings. He oriented his eyes toward the entrance doors. He waited. Inside the building, the Dragon Corps recruitment board was currently in the process of informing a young woman named Pell that her application had been denied for the 3rd time. The first rejection had been at 20. The Corps assessor had been polite. The bonding assessment showed low signal potential. Pell was encouraged to consider other applications. The second rejection had been at 21. The assessor that year was different, but the language was the same: low signal potential. The recommendation was to consider other paths. The third rejection, which was happening now, was the one Pell had not been going to attempt. She had decided at 22 that 2 rejections were enough data, and she would find a way to be useful to the Corps in a non-writer capacity, and that would have to be the end of it. Then she had spent a year being useful in a non-writer capacity, and had found that the non-writer capacity, while genuinely useful, did not address the thing that needed addressing, which was not her usefulness but her certainty. Pell was certain she was supposed to be a writer. She had been certain of this since she was 9 years old, which was the first time she had been close to a dragon, which was the first time she had felt what she later understood was the specific resonance that bond potential people felt near dragons. She had felt it clearly and immediately at 9 years old, and she had felt it clearly and immediately at 20, and 21, and 22. The Corps assessment had not found the signal, but the signal was there. She was 22 now, applying for the 3rd time, because she had concluded that being certain was worth one more attempt even if the result was the same. The assessor said the result was the same. He said it with the specific tone of someone delivering information they believed to be accurate and final. He showed Pell the reading on the assessment instrument, which showed the signal in the low range as it always had. He said the Corps wished her well in other endeavors. Pell said, "Thank you." She picked up her coat and her bag. She stood in the assessment room for a moment and looked at the instrument, which was a device about the size of a large book with a measurement scale along one face. She looked at her reading on the scale. She thought, as she had thought before, the reading is wrong. Then she thought, or the instrument is wrong. Then she put on her coat and picked up her bag. She walked down the formal corridor with its columns and its formal lighting to the broad entrance. She pushed open the entrance doors. She stepped out into the autumn morning and stopped. Nelson Mandela once said, "It always seems impossible until it is done." Pell had read this in a book at some point, and thought about it occasionally. She was thinking about it now, standing on the broad entrance steps looking at Thern. Thern, who was the oldest dragon in the Empire, who had not left the palace grounds without Emperor Ren in 30 years, was sitting 30 feet from the entrance of the Dragon Corps recruitment building, oriented directly toward her, waiting. Pell stood on the entrance steps. She had never been this close to Thern specifically. She had been near other dragons. She had been near the core assessment dragons, and the dragons she helped with in her non-rider capacity work, and several wild dragons at a distance during the mountain mapping project she had assisted with last year. She understood dragons at a functional level. She understood their scale, their weight, their behavioral patterns. Thern at 30 feet was different from all of those. He was 400 years old. The age was visible in the way the mass was visible, in something that extended beyond the physical dimensions, a quality of presence that came from 4 centuries of accumulation. His scales were the color of old copper, with green-blue at the edges where they had thinned with time. His eyes were the amber of sunlight through old glass. He was looking at her with an attention that was specific and complete. He was not looking at the building, or at the people on the street who had noticed him and stopped walking. He was looking at Pell. She walked down the entrance steps 1 step at a time. She stopped at the bottom. She thought about the resonance she had first felt at 9 years old, and that she felt every time she was near a dragon. She felt it now. It was stronger than she had ever felt it. It was strong enough that she could locate it clearly in her body, which she usually could not do. It was in her sternum, a warm pressure, specific and insistent. She walked across the stone plaza toward Thern. He did not move as she approached. He stayed absolutely still with the stillness of something very large that has decided to be patient. She walked to 10 feet and stopped. She looked at his eye. His eye looked at her. She said, "Hello." Thern exhaled. A long, slow exhale. She said, "I was just rejected again." Thern blinked once. Slowly. His eye returned to her face. She said, "The signal is there. I know it is there. The assessment does not find it." She was not quite sure why she was explaining herself to the Emperor's dragon on a public plaza. She was doing it because it seemed like the most direct thing to do given the situation, and Pell was, in most circumstances, inclined toward the most direct thing. Thern lowered his head until it was at her level. He held it there. She reached out and placed her hand flat on the side of his jaw, which was what you did when a dragon offered proximity. She did it carefully, the way she had been taught. She did it, and felt the warmth of him under her palm, and felt the resonance in her sternum change its quality to something more specific, more bilateral, like a signal that had found its receiver. She stood very still for a moment. She said quietly, "Oh." She had grown up in the river district of the capital, which was close enough to the core grounds that dragons were a constant presence overhead. She had spent her childhood watching the bonded pairs on their training flights, the dragon and rider moving as a single unit at altitude, and she had felt, every time she watched, the specific ache of wanting something that was not available to her. Her family was not a dragon family. They were dyers, 3 generations of them, her grandmother and her mother, and now her older brother. They worked with color and cloth, and the particular chemicals of their trade. They were good at it. The river district had always smelled, to Pell, of mordant and dye, and the specific mineral smell of the river, which was not unpleasant, but which was also not what she wanted her life to smell like. She had been, in most respects, a practical person. She had understood from a fairly young age that wanting something and being able to get it were 2 different things, and that the practical response to that gap was to address the gap directly rather than to want differently. So she had learned what there was to learn about dragons from every source available in the capital. She had volunteered for every opportunity that put her in proximity to the core. She had taken the assessment twice and failed it, and taken it a 3rd time because the alternative was to accept a conclusion she was not able to accept. The thing she had not been able to explain to the assessors, in any of the 3 attempts, was the nature of what she felt near dragons. The assessment measured a specific signal, using a specific instrument, against a specific threshold. What Pell felt was not a signal that fit that instrument's measurement range. It was something older and more diffuse. She had not had the language for it. Standing with her hand on Thern's jaw, she was beginning to have the language for it. The resonance in her sternum was, she thought, not a signal toward bonding. It was a signal of recognition. The bond was not being formed right now. The bond was being acknowledged. Something that had been oriented toward her for a long time was finally in the same space as her, and both halves of the orientation were present, and what she was feeling was the specific quality of a recognition that had been arriving for a very long time. She left her hand on Thern's jaw and stood on the public plaza and thought about this while the people around her kept a careful distance and watched. Emperor Ren received 3 reports in rapid succession. The first was from the gate guard. Thern had left the palace grounds at the 9th hour, direction east, no escort. The second was from the core district watch. Thern had arrived at the recruitment building at the 10th hour and appeared to be waiting at the entrance. The third was from a core officer who had been at the recruitment building for an assessment session. Thern had lowered his head to an unknown woman on the plaza, and she had placed her hand on his jaw, and they had been standing that way for approximately 20 minutes. Ren read all 3 reports. Then he read them again. He was 36 years old, and he had been bonded to Thern since he was 12. 24 years of bond meant that he understood Thern in the specific way of long familiarity, the particular rhythms of the dragon's attention, the quality of his interest in different kinds of situations, the difference between what Thern noticed and what Thern considered significant. Thern noticed everything. What he considered significant was a much smaller category. For 80 years, before Ren was born, Thern had been without a secondary bond. This was not the same as the primary bond, the one between Thern and Ren. It was a different bond that some very old dragons developed with a second person, a bond that operated alongside the primary one, and was not competitive with it but complementary. Ren had known, from the first years of his bond with Thern, that Thern was looking for this person. He had felt it in the bond as a quality of ongoing search, a directed attentiveness toward the people Thern encountered that was different from his normal observation. He had watched Thern assess people for 24 years. He had watched Thern find each of them insufficient in the specific way that the search continued after each encounter. He had waited for this for 24 years, not with impatience, with the specific quality of attention you maintain toward something you know is coming, but cannot predict the timing of. He had watched Thern assess hundreds of people in 24 years. He had felt through the bond, each time, what the assessment found, interest, and then the gentle conclusion that this was not the right person, and then the resuming of the search. He knew the quality of Thern's search so well that he could identify it instantly, the way you can identify a familiar sound in a crowded room. What he felt now was different. The search had ended. The thing Thern had been oriented toward for 80 years had resolved into a specific person, on a specific plaza, on a Thursday morning in autumn. He said to his chamberlain, "Get my horse." He rode to the recruitment building. Ren arrived at the recruitment building to find that the crowd of watchers had expanded to fill most of the plaza, and that at the center of it, Thern was still in the same position, head lowered, eyes on the woman. The woman was still standing, with her hand on his jaw. She had been there for 40 minutes. Ren came through the edge of the crowd. People moved for him automatically, which they did not always realize they were doing. He came to the inner edge of the watching space and stopped. He looked at the woman. She was young, 22 perhaps, dressed for a formal appointment rather than for outdoor work. She had a bag over one shoulder, and she had apparently been somewhere official immediately before this, because she was still in the posture of that kind of errand, slightly formal, slightly careful, now entirely still, and entirely focused on Thern. She was not performing anything. She was simply present with the dragon in the same way Thern was present with her. Ren recognized what he was seeing. He had seen the quality of Thern's attention many times. He had never seen this particular form of it, this complete directed stillness that excluded everything else. But he recognized it in the way you recognize something you have been told about, without knowing when you would see it. He stepped forward. The woman heard his approach and looked at him without taking her hand from Thern's jaw. She looked at his face, then at the bond mark on his wrist, then at Thern, then back at him. She said, "He is yours." Ren said, "He is, and you are." She blinked. She said, "I am not in the Corps. I have been rejected 3 times." He said, "I know. I read the reports on the way here." She said, "The assessment found low signal potential." He said, "The assessment uses an instrument calibrated for the standard bonding signal. Thern's secondary bond operates on a different frequency. The instrument has never found it, because it was not designed to look for it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is that documented anywhere?" He said, "No. We did not know the frequency existed. We knew Thern had been looking for someone for 80 years. We did not know what the signal looked like from the person's side." She said, "From the person's side, it feels like a warm pressure in the sternum." He said, "Yes?" She said, "Since I was 9 years old." Ren looked at Thern. Thern looked at him with the amber eyes, and through the bond Ren felt what Thern felt, which was the specific quality of something that had been searching for a very long time, finding what it was searching for. It was the warmest thing Ren had felt through the bond. It was the thing he had been waiting to feel through the bond for 20. He said, to the woman, "What is your name?" She said, "Pell." He said, "Pell. I am Ren. I have some things to tell you." He told her, on the plaza, with Thern still between them and the crowd at a respectful distance, the things that needed to be said first. He told her about the secondary bond. He told her what Thern had been doing for 80 years. He told her what he had felt through his own bond with Thern each time Thern encountered someone and found them not to be what he was searching for. Pell listened without interrupting. She had her hand still on Thern's jaw. She listened to Ren the way she listened to everything, with complete attention and no performance. When he finished, she said, "I am not a trained rider." He said, "I know." She said, "I do not know how to fly." He said, "Thern will teach you. He has been doing this for 4 centuries. You are not the first person he has introduced to flight. You will learn what you need to learn." She said, "I have a job. I work for the Corps Archives in a document management capacity." He said, "That is also fine. The document management position is useful. You understand the core infrastructure. That is not a disadvantage." She said, "You are not concerned about the formal training gap." He said, "Thern chose you. Thern is 400 years old. His assessment is better than any instrument the Corps has designed." She thought about this. She said, "That is a reasonable position." She paused. "It is also a significant change in how the Corps thinks about bond identification." He said, "Yes, it is." She said, "There are probably other people the Corps missed. People who felt the signal but did not show up on the assessment instrument." He looked at her. It was a more immediate observation than he had expected. He said, "I have been thinking the same thing since I received the reports this morning." She said, "That is what I would want to fix first." He said, "Then that is where we start." She looked at Thern. Thern was still. His eyes were on her face. She thought about 9 years old, and the warmth in her sternum, and the 3 rejections, and the year of non-writer archival work, and the 3rd application she had decided not to make, and then made anyway. She said, to Thern, "I had a feeling you were coming. I did not know how to explain that to anyone." Thern exhaled the long, slow exhale. She said, "All right." She looked at Ren. "Tell me what comes next." The Dragon Corps commander received the news at midday. He had been aware that something unusual was happening at the recruitment building. He had sent 3 people to observe, and each of them had come back with a version of the same report, which was, "Thern is on the plaza, the Emperor is there is a woman, the situation appears to be under control but unusual." The commander was a practical man named Dale, who had spent 30 years managing practical things. He received the midday report and thought about it practically. The practical analysis was this: a 400-year-old dragon had chosen a person. That person was not in the core. She had applied 3 times and been assessed as low signal potential and rejected. She had a document management position in the core archives, and yet here was Thern, who had not chosen anyone in 80 years. Dale thought about the assessment instrument. He thought about the fact that it had been calibrated 300 years ago for the standard bonding frequency and had not been significantly revised since. He thought about what it meant that the instrument had not found Pell's signal and Thern had found it immediately. He called in his chief assessor. He said, "We have a calibration problem. I want a full review of the assessment instrument parameters before the next recruitment session." The assessor said, "What specifically are we looking for?" Dale said, "Whatever frequency Thern uses that we have not been measuring." He paused. He said, "Also, update the records. The woman named Pell, change her status to accepted candidate, then send her a formal acceptance. I do not want her to have to keep a rejection on her file." He paused again. He said, 3 rejections. We owe her an apology, along with the acceptance." The assessor said he would take care of it. Dale looked out his window at the plaza, where Thern was now carrying Ren and Pell on his back for what appeared to be a very slow, very low practice flight. The first flight. He watched them circle once above the administrative district. He thought, we should have found her 2 years ago. Pell had never been on a dragon. She had imagined it many times, the way people who want a specific thing imagine it so often that the imagining becomes worn smooth, all the edges softened by repetition. She had imagined the wind. She had imagined the altitude. She had imagined the specific feeling of something lifting. The imagining was not wrong, but it was not the same. When Thern's feet left the ground on the first lift, she felt the shift in her sternum change quality again. The recognition that had been there since 9 years old, the warm pressure that had been a signal without a receiver for 13 years, became something with direction. It was not just recognition, it was orientation. She was oriented toward Thern in the specific way that the bond worked. She understood now, not as a signal sent from one to the other, but as a shared direction. They were both pointed at the same thing, which was wherever they were going together. Ren was behind her on Thern's back. He had been on Thern thousands of times. He was entirely comfortable. He told her, calmly, what to do with her weight when Thern banked. He told her where to look to avoid disorientation. He told her how to read Thern's wing position to anticipate direction change. She listened. She adjusted. She looked at the city laid out below her. She thought, I knew this was here. I always knew this was here. She also thought, I want to go higher. She did not say this out loud. She was aware that she was on her first flight, on a dragon she had known for 4 hours, with the Emperor of the Empire behind her, and that suggesting more altitude on a first flight was probably not the technically sound request. She filed it for later. She was going to be doing this for a long time. There would be opportunities. Thern flew the slow, careful circle of a first flight with a new person. He was patient, the way very old things are patient, without effort, without performance. The patience was simply part of what he was. The city was small below them. The palace was visible to the north, its familiar shape from the ground resolved into something different from above. The river district, where she had grown up, was visible to the west, the dye works, and the river and the colored cloth drying on frames in the autumn sun. She looked at it from the air for the first time. She thought about her grandmother, and her mother, and her brother, and the smell of mordant and dye. She thought about the warmth in her sternum at 9 years old, watching bonded pairs on their training flights, and feeling the ache of wanting. She was not aching now. They landed in the upper courtyard of the palace, where Thern usually did his morning stretches, and which the staff kept clear at dawn. Pell climbed down from Thern's back carefully, and stood on the courtyard stone, and looked up at him. He looked down at her. She put her hand on his jaw again. briefly, and the resonance completed itself in the way it had been trying to complete for 13 years. She said, "Thank you for coming." He lowered his eye to her level and held it there. Ren stood beside her. He said, "The formal rider training can begin whenever you are ready. There is no schedule requirement. We will go at whatever pace is right." She said, "I want to start tomorrow." He said, "Then we start tomorrow." She looked at the palace around her. She was not accustomed to palaces. She was accustomed to the river district, and the core archives, and the particular worn stone of the recruitment building's formal corridor. The palace was different in scale and material, and the quality of its silence. She said, "I will need to arrange things. My apartment. The archives job. Someone will need to take over the document management." He said, "I can have someone help you arrange all of that." She said, "I would prefer to arrange it myself." He said, "Then I will have someone available if you need help." She thought about the 3 rejection letters in her apartment. She had kept them. She had not kept them out of sadness, but because she had the specific habit of keeping records. She kept records of everything. She would add today to the record. Ren said, "The assessor sent a message. They are revising the instrument parameters." Pell said, "Good. There are other people who felt what I felt and did not pass the assessment." He said, "I know. We are going to find them." She nodded. She looked at Thern one more time. Thern was watching her with the amber eyes, settled now in the particular stillness of an animal that has completed a long effort and can rest. She said, to Ren, "I have questions. A lot of them. Can we start now?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Good." They walked toward the palace interior. Behind them, Thern settled in the upper courtyard in the particular way he settled when he was done with the effort of the day and content with where it had brought him. His wings folded, his eyes closed slowly. In 80 years of search, he had assessed hundreds of people. He had been patient with all of it, because 400 years teaches patience in a way that nothing else does. He had known the person was out there. He had known because the orientation had always been there, directed at something he could not yet see, the way a compass needle knows north without being told. He had known on a Thursday morning in autumn, at the 9th hour, when he walked through the east gate without the emperor and without an escort, and moved through the city at ground level to arrive at the entrance of the recruitment building at exactly the moment the doors opened. He had not been early. He had not been late. The warmth in Pell's sternum was constant and clear, and nothing like the ache it had replaced.